Welcome back to CFO Weekly, where we're talking with financial leaders about how to build efficiency in their teams, create time for strategy, and ultimately get results. With your host, Megan Weis. Let's jump right in.
Today, my guest is Stephen Newland. Stephen is the Director of FP&A at GrowthLab Financial. He leads a team of analysts responsible for developing financial models, analyzing business valuations, and providing ongoing financial support to a number of startups and small businesses. Stephen has worked in a finance role at a variety of organizations, including startups, early-stage companies, nonprofits, and Fortune 500s. He earned the Certified Management Accountant, CMA, designation in July of 2022 and holds an Honors Bachelor's of Business Administration degree in Finance and Accounting from the University of Cincinnati. Stephen, thank you very much for being my guest today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Megan. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, today we'll be hearing your story, of course, but we'll also be learning about some of the mistakes you made throughout your journey and how you put those to good use, particularly early on in your career. And now you use those same lessons to help others too. So I'm excited to learn from you. So let's jump right in.
Perfect. Let's do it.
First, and as always, let's start with you and your story. How did you get to where you are today?
Yeah, I love starting here. So I grew up in Ohio, Cincinnati, Ohio, and I actually in college I was like, I just want to get out of Ohio. that was my thought process. I love Cincinnati. I love where I'm from now. It's funny how that turns around. But so I actually interned down in Atlanta, Georgia, with Delta Airlines, and right out of school, I love the airline industry, so I moved there and I moved to Atlanta and started my career in corporate finance at Delta. Did that for a number of years and. I just really got this itch to want to go into the nonprofit world, and particularly on the personal finance side. And there's a story there that I'd love to get into. So I went and did that. I did help people budget and pay off debt for about 6 years. So not corporate finance related, but very much finance related, and so many lessons that I learned on that side that are very applicable to corporate finance. After that, I just decided I really wanted to get back in the business world, so I jumped into the startup world, and pretty much have been working with startups ever since. So that's been about 4 or 5 years now. Been working with various startups, and now more on the advisory side. So.
Just curious, what do you enjoy about working for startups?
Oh, that's a great question.
I imagine it's stressful.
There's a level of stress that some days you're like, wow, this is a very stressful industry, or very stressful, I guess, size of the company. I think it's just you're just constantly solving problems. So I've always loved that. I've always enjoyed puzzles and solving problems, and so there's more problems than there are time at startups, especially small and scaling startups. And so I think that's what makes them fun.
I like being a Sherlock Holmes too. And that's, yeah.
That's right. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah. So as you look back on your career, are there particular stories that stand out in your mind as like a turning point?
Yeah, it was this when I was in corporate finance at, like I said, at Delta. I had been in the background. I had been paying off a bunch of student debt. So I paid off about $55,000 in the first 4 years out of school.
Wow! Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, it was. I remember being in my room at college right before I graduated, and I put together a plan, and I said, "Okay, 4 years, I can do this if I really buckle down." So once I paid that off, I guess I always tell people I had my mid-20s career crisis. And I said, I gotta go work at a nonprofit. I gotta go just help people do this. And so I went to, that's what triggered me to go run a financial literacy program. But that was a really big turning point, because I had really been doing well in corporate finance and kind of moving up the ladder. And so I got a lot of questions like, are you sure you really want to do this? And so that was a big turning point for me.
I'm just curious also, how did you end up at Delta? I don't think that they came to Cincinnati to recruit. So
Yeah, funny enough, we had,
or maybe they did. They're a hub, right, in Cincinnati?
yeah, we had a hub, and there was, I forget the connection. We had a connection with the cargo department. That was like our connection, and so yeah, I can't remember the exact reason, but yeah, part of it was we had a hub up there. So
okay,
yeah.
I always forget that that's a hub for Delta.
That's right. Yeah. You don't think of it as a big. Yeah, it's not what you would consider a bigger hub. But
no, Cincinnati's a pretty small city, but it's a good size.
Yeah.
So talk to us about GrowthLab, which is a finance-as-a-service company, and how it works, how they work with companies to optimize their finances for growth.
Yeah, it's the kind of the standard, the bookkeeping and the tax side, but what I primarily am working with is on the FP&A side. And really what we're trying to do is productize FP&A. And so we're trying to figure out, how do we know the core things that most customers need, most startups really need. They need like a forecast, they need a plan for their cash flow. And so that's really what we're primarily focused on is giving them a lens into the future through the forecasting and making sure that they're, spending cash efficiently.
So who would you say the ideal client is?
Oh, that's such a great question. I think it's the startup who has kind of reached that point where they feel like they just are wearing 7 hats. The CEO or the co-founders are wearing 7 different hats, and they're like, I've got to start offloading some things. I can't do this anymore, or I can't give this the attention that it needs. That's kind of when okay, I've reached that perfect point to reach out to somebody.
And is it like a platform or a service or a combination of the two?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. We're primarily, we use a handful of tools internally. Drab is a big one that we use for our FP&A planning, amongst a few others. There's Basis and Sift, or a couple other ones, Fathom. So we kind of figure out, okay, which technology is going to be the best for that customer, and then we've got a plan to kind of build their forecast within that platform, and we meet with them regularly to review that and update it.
And let's switch over and talk about you and some of the mistakes you made that were early on in your career. And can you share a little bit about those?
Yes, I will never forget. This first one always comes to mind. I think it's the first mistake I would probably say I remember from my career, and it was I was going in for like a monthly financial review, and I had prepped the full deck, ready to review it. With one of the department heads at Delta, and my boss, he always wanted to review it ahead of time. And he got his calculator out during this review, and he was adding up the numbers down a column. And I was like, that's interesting. And then he said, oh, these don't add up.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh no, this is my first month or two out of school. And I'm like, I've made the cardinal sin mistake. I didn't check my formula. And so that was one I always remember. And so it's funny, I always have, even though I've got a calculator on my phone, I always have a calculator next to me. And I find myself doing this now where I'm like, let me just check. So that is one that really stands out. So that, that highlighted to me, especially in finance, it's the importance of accuracy and kind of, getting the numbers right. Now, it's not the end of the world, but it certainly impacts credibility and, trustworthiness. And so that is one big one. The second one that comes to mind is not thinking of my audience when preparing or doing some sort of analysis. I would just kind of jump right in and say, oh, this sounds fun. I want to go this way. I want to do this, versus kind of planning it out and say, well, what would the end user, how would they benefit from this analysis? So I think that's another one that I really learned early on.
Yeah, I guess as finance professionals, a big part of what we do is we're storytellers. And I think you're right. It's important to know your audience before you jump right in.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah, if you're writing a children's book, you're going to write that very differently than you would with some other adult novel or something.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So talk to us a bit about how these mistakes actually, you turn them around to advance your career.
Yeah, I think for me, it was, I made sure not to make the same mistakes, not to repeat them. And
so important.
It really is. Yeah, it really is important. And I think part of that is just making sure you're being intentional with your growth, not just waiting for that feedback from leadership, but like, so for example, when I missed that, when I missed that formula, I don't know if I actually did this, but one thing that, I would tell somebody in my shoe and early in their career now is I would say, okay, write that down and make sure like you've got a system in place now so that you don't miss that formula or there's like a check in place. So I think it's just being intentional with your own growth, and when those mistakes happen, like write them down and figure out, okay, how can I fix this? How can I not make this mistake again? That to me is critical.
Yeah, I guess as humans, like we're all bound to make mistakes. It's just the people that actually go on to learn something. And there is a lot to be learned from every mistake that, is doing the right thing.
Well, and I bet people, I've been in my career for coming up on 12, 13 years now. I would venture to guess people who are 30, 40 years in, they would say the same thing. Like, you're always learning. There's always going to be a mistake or something along the way. And so there's never a time where that learning stops, I think.
Yeah. I can forgive like any mistake, but the one thing that I always have a hard time with is forgiving a mistake that's made twice.
Exactly. Yes, agreed.
So what skills do you believe were essential in helping you stand out and to advance more quickly within the finance organization?
Yeah, I was thinking about this a little bit too, of like what was helpful for me, but then also now as someone who's had the chance to lead some people in finance, like what do I think of as like these are critical, like these really stand out. And I think the three that came really to mind are, and I would probably say in this order, is reliability. So if you say you're going to do something, do it, and make sure it's done. If it's not on time, communicate like, hey, it's not going to be on time, but here's why. The more reliable somebody is, it just takes this mental burden off of your leadership. I think number two is being thorough, and not just kind of giving up a little early and saying, well, let me just ask my leader. Let me just ask them, my manager, like what they think, but like trying to like go the extra mile and say, I don't know, but I'm gonna dig a little deeper than I'm comfortable, and I'm gonna try to figure this thing out. And if I don't know, I'll go to my manager and mention it. But so I think that's number two. And then three is clear and timely communication. So back to my first point, if I've committed to a deadline and I'm just not able to hit that, I think 9 times out of 10, that's generally going to be okay if you just proactively communicate and say, hey, I thought I would get this done. I wasn't able to. Here's my plan of action to get this done as soon as possible. So I think those are really the three in my mind that stand out far and above most other things.
Yeah, especially the third one. I think, people hate when they don't know if you're working on something or like what you're doing. So
and what I would do early in my career is I'd want to look good, like I had it all buttoned up. So I would wait to like respond to emails until I had the analysis perfectly done. And it's been 3-4 days, and they're like, does he even acknowledge? But so that was that backfired
a good lesson.
That's right.
So let's talk about soft skills and how important those are and how people can go about developing these skills early in their career.
Yeah. And I think time management is a big one, especially in corporate finance, where it feels like there's always a deadline kind of around the corner, or there's a fire drill, or I need this an hour ago kind of thing. So time management, and I would even add to that, like prioritization is huge. I remember when I first when I first started my career, I didn't take notes. I didn't really use a calendar. I was like, oh, I just remember it all. Like, it's not that big of a deal. And it's so funny how just even a few years out of into my 20s, it was like, oh no, I can't remember all this stuff. I've got too many responsibilities and bills to pay outside of work, and I can't remember all this stuff now. And so that was a big one. I think the second one that I would say is like creative thinking, and maybe even kind of, I think, goes along the same lines as like just developing a curiosity. That, especially in finance, I think asking why and asking good questions in finance can take you so far. And because a lot of the times you're there to try to point out things or like call out things in the business or highlight things that maybe somebody else hasn't highlighted. So learning how to ask those questions and just being curious, I think, goes a really long way in finance.
I've had a lot of people tell me that that's a very important characteristic to them is curiosity.
Yeah. I would even add maybe one more piece to that. I would say curiosity about the business that you're helping, but also even curiosity about people. Because I think I posted something the other not too long ago about on LinkedIn about finance is all about relationships. And one book that really helped me get more curious about people and developing relationships was How to Win Friends and Influence People. So that's been a really, really great kind of impactful book for me in developing my own curiosity.
Yeah, I think sometimes early on in our career, like we don't really want to stand out and you're afraid to ask questions and look stupid. But it's so important to be able to do that.
That's a great point about, that being kind of fearful to ask questions. That's a really, really good point.
So, and you just mentioned this, but building relationships. So can you talk a little bit about the strategies or tactics that you've used to build relationships and win over the trust of leadership?
Yeah, I think this goes kind of in a similar vein to what one thing we talked about earlier. But I think build trust. Building trust is like the number one foundational thing to building a good relationship. And I think if you commit to something or if you say you're going to do something and you actually follow through, that is the quickest way to build trust. So I think that is key. The other thing, and then this is very kind of role dependent, but I know when I was at a bigger company, I was like a finance person, and then I reported into a department, but I was still in the finance department. And so I was kind of like an outsider. And so there's always this like skeptical, like, can we trust the finance person? Or are they just like trying to find something, like they're from corporate, like they're just trying to dig in and find something. And so I think, if you're at a bigger company, it's communicating to that business unit you're supporting that, hey, I want to know your goals and I want to know how I can support your goals. That's just as important to me as, me kind of in what I have to do on the finance side. So I think that's just another way to kind of break down that defensiveness and really build relationships.
Yeah, that's great advice. I know a lot of times in finance, you're kind of looked at as like the police out there to just say no and that's it.
Yes. I was going to add one more thing on that if I can.
Sure.
So one other way to build relationships with leadership is just to ask this question: what is my leader worrying about at night? Like, what is keeping them up at night? And then you could even ask them that. I think it's okay to ask them that. I think that would go a long way. And finding ways to alleviate that concern. I can't think of many other things that will help build trust with your leadership if you took that proactive approach.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great advice. So you might have touched on this a bit with the time management, but how can people succeed in fast-paced, high-pressure environments, like particularly, you said you enjoy working at startups. How do people succeed in that kind of an environment?
Yeah, for me, it's been a journey. I wouldn't say I've always gotten it right, and there's even still some days I'm trying to figure that out. But I think staying organized is really when you've got some downtime, it's taking advantage of that and really staying organized. I think the second piece is being intentional about learning where your gaps are. So if you're in a meeting and something comes up and you're just you kind of find yourself fumbling a little bit, or you're like, I don't really know the answer to that. Jot that down like real quick in your notes. And then, maybe later that night or later that week, like take 15 minutes, 30 minutes and try to learn more on that topic. That will, it's kind of that whole practice makes perfect saying, right? Like you're in a high pressure environment, the more prepared you feel and the more prepared you are, it's going to reduce the amount of pressure that you really feel in that environment. And so I think that's been a good tip for me. The other thing, and I have not done well with this, so this is a little, I guess, hypocritical saying this, but I would say it's okay to just step away for 5 minutes. Like if you're kind of getting flustered, if you feel that kind of blood pressure rising a little bit, just step away for 5 minutes. I've gotten better at this over the last, I would say, year. It's amazing how 5 minutes away from the desk, you can come back and you're like, oh, that was the answer I was looking for. And so that's I don't know if you've experienced that same thing, but I know that's been helpful for me when I've actually like implemented it.
Yeah, I'm not great at it either, but you're right. Sometimes you step away from a problem and come back and like the answer's right in front of your face.
Yeah.
You just couldn't see it because you were too flustered in the moment.
Yep, that's right.
So how do you suggest someone that's new to corporate finance, how can they stay informed about industry trends and developments? And I think this is true. I mean, I guess no matter what stage of your career you're in, I think it's always important to stay on top of these things.
Yeah, I agree. For me, the one thing, so this past year I went and got about a year ago, maybe a year and a half, I got the CMA designation, certified management. Thank you. I did it with, we had a newborn. We had a newborn at the time. And so I look back and I'd say, okay, that was probably not the wisest timing, but we made it through. And that, people talk about the continuing education and, sometimes it's like, oh, I don't always want to do this, but it kind of forces you to stay on top of trends. And oftentimes a lot of the certifications and a lot of these continuing education programs, they're really, really great about putting out new content and new updates. And so to me, that's one really great way to not only level up your skills and your confidence by getting the certification, but it kind of builds in this, to keep the certification, I've got to maintain a level of, continuing ed. So I think that's one. But if you don't want to go that route, I think there's so much free education out there today. I think it's just picking like what medium works well for you. Podcast articles, YouTube. I've learned so much about finance and kind of brushed up on corporate finance from YouTube. It's amazing what all is out there. So,
yeah, that's really great advice. So, how will someone new to corporate finance best prepare themselves to be considered for promotions and raises? I mean, particularly when you're new to your career, it's not something you want to ask for, but maybe you should be.
Yeah. I think at first, I've talked a little bit about soft skills. I think the first thing, like from a foundational standpoint, is to have really sound technical skills. But then I think what oftentimes happens is we focus just on the technical skill side because it's a little bit more tangible, right? And we're, finance and accounting people, I think it's easier to see us growing on the technical side, whereas it's maybe a little like, I don't know, maybe a little fluffier on the soft skill side.
It's a good word.
And so, yes. And so I think it's like getting that foundation on the technical skill side, but then really like shifting not to like shift away and like never like work on technical skills. But then I think it's like, okay, I've got a good foundation on the technical side. How can I work on the soft skill side? Because the reality is, getting into management, if that's a goal, the technical skills are great, but the soft skills are really what's going to carry you in that management position. And I think a lot of times it's the people who are really good at the technical skills who get promoted into the management roles, and they're kind of hit with this, how do I manage a team? How do I do this? And so I think focusing on soft skills early is it will show that you're poised for leadership, I think.
Yeah, I love that advice. I do agree that the more you move up, into the levels of management, the more important those soft skills become.
Yeah. Agreed. Yeah. And I think the other piece of that is be the most prepared person walking into any meeting, even if you're there just to take notes early in your career. I think that can serve most people really well as if they really take the time to prepare for a meeting.
And when you're in the advisory role working with startups, what is some of the most common mistakes that you see startups making?
Yeah, I think, and I actually was, I would say I didn't get this really right in some of the finance roles I've been in, but I would say managing working capital, not having tight operations around accounts receivable, or maybe, so maybe you have your accounts receivable are kind of, you got some in the 45, 60, maybe some in the 90 days overdue, and maybe paying accounts payable a little too aggressively, just like when the bill comes in, I'll just pay it. But as we know, especially with a startup, and it depends how you're funded. If you're, for a lot of startups, if you're well funded, it's, you can kind of, it's okay. But I think getting into that habit early is always good, because there usually comes a time in a lot of startups world where the cash isn't so flush. And so I think just focusing on good, solid operations on working capital is a big one.
And I'm really interested to get into this, but you spent 6 years developing plans to help people pay off debt and budget their resources. Yes. So how did that time that you spent focusing on the personal side of finance help you in your understanding of corporate finance?
I would meet oftentimes face to face with people. And I mean, money is so personal, like personal finance. And so they would like lay it all out. They would say,
it can be really painful too, I'm sure.
Incredibly. Yeah. And so here's my credit card balance. Here's how much student loans I have. Here's how much money I make. I mean, like all out there. And so I quickly realized the emotion and the psychology behind money, because I saw it in front of me. I'd have people of all ages cry in my office. And I really, for the first time, I went into that role thinking money is just numbers. It's just numbers. And I quickly realized, oh, wow, no, this is very emotional. And it's emotional in corporate finance too. Maybe it's not as obvious, but that really helped me understand like the foundations of how, just as people, we interact with money. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure, especially in like the startup world where people have like everything tied up in their dreams of getting these organizations off the ground.
Yes. And one thing I've seen with startups is, and this is true of personal finance, this is true of startups, short-term thinking happens when we have little, and excess happens when we have a lot. Yeah. And so guarding against those is really important. So when you go out and raise, a round, a Series A or a seed, it's easy to just be like, we need this subscription, we need this, we need that, we need that. And then all of a sudden you look up and you're like, where'd the money go? And sometimes that's true. Like, it's funny when I know I'm a natural saver, but I know it's easy to, like, when you get or maybe a refund from the IRS, or if you get a raise, you're like, you've spent it before you even see it on your first paycheck. or you see the check hit. And so I think that's just another lesson in that is of just, and then short-term thinking too. It's when you see that bank account dwindle, it really impacts your decision-making. And that can result in a really bad outcome for a startup, right? And so, it's just those are a couple of things that I've really kind of discovered, I think, through that process.
And what's one piece of advice you have for aspiring CFOs or finance leads?
I am saying this advice to myself. So I would say take care of yourself first. It's so easy to put your career first. But I would say, and this is, I think your family and your health, like that is most important. That is most critical because it will help you be able to have a sustainable career, not burn out and not, and this is actually an area, like in full transparency, I have got probably the most wrong of anything I've talked about today. And so it's an area like I'm trying to really focus more on, especially this year. And so, this just been this, that would be my number one piece of advice.
I'm going to put you on the spot. What are you doing? What are you doing to put yourself first?
Yeah, one of the big things is, so I work primarily from home. I'm in Atlanta. My company is based out of Rhode Island. One of the things that I've realized is I will go days and not even leave the house just because it's, I get up, work, family comes home, then it's family time. And then it's like, okay, rinse and repeat next day. And so, being more proactive with like, there's a local men's group that I'm joining here to get more involved, like on Friday mornings, actually, getting out of the house to go to the gym instead of exercising at home. So those are a couple of the key things it's like that I'm working on.
Yeah. I make sure I get out of the house almost every day to go to the gym during lunch, but that's so helpful. Otherwise, you're right. It's so easy just to stay in your pajamas for days on end and work your life away.
Well, and it's there's always more work to do, but I think it's setting up those healthy boundaries is always a good thing. And it's self-driven. This isn't like company driven. This is like me and like my natural bend to like work more. But I think a lot of CFOs and finance people are geared like naturally that way. So.
Yeah, I would agree. But I do agree with you also that taking the time for yourself makes you a better leader, a better employee, all of it. So it's great advice. So lastly, what is keeping you up at night?
Yeah, I think just the number of emerging tools out there in the finance world. It seems like I don't know if it's because I've paid more attention in the last year. It just seems like it's almost exploded.
Yeah.
There's a new tool for this, there's a new tool for that. And so it's finding the time and resources to, evaluate them, but then also, hey, is this the right one? Is there a better one out there that we could be using to better serve customers? So it's staying on that front edge of the technology side.
Stephen, thank you so much for being my guest today.
Yeah, absolutely. This was fun. I appreciate it. Any chance to get to share some of my mistakes and insight, I love it. So
yeah, that's great. And so nice of you to share your mistakes so that other people don't necessarily have to make the same ones.
That's my goal. If I can help someone avoid something, then I'm happy to share.
Well, I've really enjoyed speaking with you and hearing about your experiences and all of the resulting insights. And I wish you the best as we start off 2023. And to all of our listeners, please tune in next week. And until then, take care.
If you're ready to boost efficiency and streamline your accounting processes at significant cost savings, it's time to talk with Personiv. Their people-powered solutions have transformed the delivery of back-office tasks and general accounting functions for decades, partnering with clients to provide everything from accounts payable to payroll services. See what Personiv can do for you by visiting personiv.com.
You've been listening to CFO Weekly, presented by Personiv. Please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts to hear all of our episodes. Want to learn more? Check out personiv.com. Thanks for listening.